The moment Aria Monroe saw her husband Dorian Hale's hand resting on another woman's lower back, guiding her through the currents of soft jazz in the chandelier light of the Aurelia Grand Ballroom, something in Aria went utterly, beautifully still. Not her heart, though it faltered. Not her breath, though the air thickened against her lungs like velvet too heavy for summer. What stopped was the meek little part of her that had been writing excuses in cursive for 3 long years. The "he's just working late" part, the "we're in a rough patch" part, the "it's only perfume from a handshake" part. From her vantage at the marble threshold, Aria looked like a portrait, an emerald gown sculpted along her body, a clean sweep of curls framing her face, the kind of poise you can't buy with money or mimic with practice. She had spent 2 hours in the mirror crafting a version of herself that might tempt memory out of hiding, him and her, before the boardrooms and the bodyguards. Because this was Dorian's charity ball, the event he curated each spring to flex power and benevolence in the same gesture. She'd imagined that maybe tonight, under crystal light, they could remember who they used to be. But the woman in the tight red dress wasn't memory. She was Lila Vance. 30 if a day, all lacquered lips and molten eyes. And Dorian looked at her with a hunger Aria hadn't seen in him in years, a bright, unashamed wanting that didn't belong to spouses or speeches or the sanctity of promises made at an altar. Glass stems chimed. Laughter frothed. Donors floated past with the murmur of money. No one noticed the quiet spasm of an ending at the door. Aria had enough temper in her blood to cross the ballroom and detonate the lie. She had enough training in Dorian's world to know the winner never explodes. The winner composes. The winner observes, collects, and files. So she glided in, smile primed, fingers light on a passing flute of champagne. She folded herself into a constellation of wives and board members and talked about centerpieces and scholarships in a voice that made people lean closer, like they might catch the secret of grace if they listened hard enough. She watched. Dorian and Lila moved through 3 songs. They slipped to the balcony for 15 minutes. They returned with Lila's lipstick a breath out of place, and Dorian's tie a fraction looser, enough to tell an entire story to anyone trained to read edges. When Dorian finally saw Aria, panic flashed across his irises like a lightning photograph, and then the old smile slid in to erase it. The one that had charmed her in a pizza parlor, senior year, when ambition was a bright coin in his palm, and he swore he would buy them the world. He touched her cheek perfunctorily. "You look exquisite," he said, cologne carefully layered over something not his. "The event is perfect," she replied. "Hale Foundation has never felt more generous." They moved together as if choreographed, the ballet of introductions and empty compliments. His hand steered. Her laugh hovered like warm light, and with every performative beat, a new alloy set inside her chest. Something harder than heartbreak, colder than fury, polished enough to reflect a strategy back at the man who'd taught her strategy in the first place. When the MC summoned Dorian to the dais, Lila watched him as if prayer were a person. Aria watched Lila. Aria watched everyone. The room was a map, and she, suddenly, could see routes she'd never permitted herself to consider. Paths out, paths through, paths over. Dorian gave a speech about kids who'd never seen their names in gilt on a donor wall. The applause rose like weather. Aria clapped, serene as a lake. She could have left, but leaving would write a narrative with her absence. Aria preferred ink she held. "Mrs. Hale," cooed Marjorie Lowell, whose husband sat on Dorian's board and liked to call his wealth patient capital as if money were a saint. "You simply glow this evening." "Lighting is a merciful friend," Aria said with a smile that set Marjorie buzzing off to repeat the line as if she'd minted it. The orchestra slid into a waltz. A photographer angled for Aria's face. She gave him the kind of smile that photographs buy from a lifetime of composure. And then, because she was done pretending she hadn't seen what she'd seen, she walked, unhurried, fearless, toward the balcony. Outside, the city glittered, like it had secrets it wanted to keep. For a few seconds, Aria let herself be a woman alone with cold air and honest thoughts. The Aurelia's ironwork railing pressed a delicate pattern into her palms. A memory popped. Dorian teaching her chess on a checkered blanket, sophomore spring. telling her the board is never about the move. It's about the threat of the move. She'd married a man who played life like a grandmaster. She had learned. She had learned well. Arya, the voice behind her, smooth, practiced, her husband alone. She turned, eyebrows a question. Dorian's smile reached for an old script. Didn't expect you on the balcony. Really? She asked lightly. I thought it was the place for fresh air. A shadow of irritation crossed his features and vanished. The governor's staff wants a photo with us after dessert. I told them you'd... Of course, she said, and then tilted her head toward the ballroom. Lila Vance looks lovely in red. For the first time, his mask quivered. She's from marketing. The board asked me to... Dorian, Arya said, voice as soft as velvet and sharp as the pin that holds it. Please don't insult me. Not tonight. Silence spooled. In the ballroom, a laugh arced high and bright. Down on the sidewalk, a limousine door closed with money in the click. You've misunderstood, he tried again, gentler now, like the tone could reframe the picture. Arya only watched him, the way you watch a painting you finally decided not to buy. You admire the skill, you recognize the color, you feel nothing that wants to go home with you. Go inside, as she said. Your donors are thirsty. He hesitated. For an instant, one brief, treacherous instant, Arya saw the boy with pizza sauce at the corner of his mouth, swearing he'd spend a lifetime proving her right to bet on him. Then the man returned, nodding like a deal had been tabled, rather than detonated. We'll talk at home, he promised. We won't, she thought, and smiled because smiling was a language everyone there understood. Inside, she became the axis of a room that didn't know it had already shifted. She placed her champagne flute beside an orchid, like a queen leaving a calling card. When the governor's staff wanted their photograph, Arya shone so thoroughly that the camera loved her more than the man who'd brought the money. Reporters wrote regal in their heads. Lila stared, a fraction too long, then fixed her mouth into something almost brave. Arya crossed paths with Sloane Carter, the friend who'd stuck by through lean years and fat egos. Sloane's eyes flicked to Lila, back to Arya, and filled with a danger Arya had no energy to manage tonight. Say the word, Sloane murmured. I'll start a fire they won't forget. Not tonight, Arya said. Tonight we collect oxygen. You scare me when you talk like that, Sloane whispered, halfway in awe. Good, Arya replied, and kissed her cheek. She stayed exactly as long as a wife stays when the performance demands a perfect exit. She complimented the pastry chef. She thanked the lighting designer. She touched the donor's elbow and called his daughter brilliant because she was. And then she approached Dorian and told him, very gently, that her head hurt and she'd be taking the car ahead. She watched the relief flicker through him like a matches struck in wind, brief, guilty, eager to go out on the balcony again. The town car swallowed her into private quiet. The driver asked if she needed anything. Just a city, she said, and some silence. The skyline complied. By the time the mansion's gates parted and the house lights hummed alive, a museum of gorgeous intentions, Arya's plan was already assembling itself like architecture in her mind. She did not cry. She poured water and let it sit untouched until it warmed useless. She moved through Dorian's home office not like a trespasser, but like a woman reclaiming a wing of herself. She opened drawers she had never opened, felt the starch of a life that had rearranged her into decor, and learned at last to rearrange it back. Files, duplicate statements, corporate cards with charges that wore disguises thinner than muslin, hotel folios close enough to the office to pretend the office was the point, jewelry receipts never followed by a velvet box on her nightstand, a burner phone in a bottom drawer, forgotten like a bad habit. She did not swallow the bile that rose, not because she was weak, but because her body was telling the truth, and she was done muting truth for anyone. She photographed every page, every odd transfer, every mismatch a forensic eye would savor. She didn't need to be the expert. She merely needed to be the archivist of her own rescue. At 1:12 a.m., Dorian texted a silver version of concern. Home soon. You okay? Arya set the phone face down like a finished chapter. She walked into the bedroom that had once been the center of a universe and realized it had become an annex to a story that bored her. She slept 3.5 hours. The deep, dreamless sleep of a woman who has accepted that something sacred is dead and that morning can start tomorrow because tonight there is only strategy. At 7:03 a.m., sunlight cut a bright seam across the hardwood. The house was empty. She brewed coffee she didn't taste and dialed a number Sloane had pushed across cafe tables in hushed tones during the last year. Cassandra Reed, the divorce attorney, whispered about in rooms where men assumed wives didn't know their names kept watch. 56. Silver hair cut close. Navy suits and a courtroom cadence that sounded like a gavel taking a breath. "Reed Law," said a voice as crisp as linen. "How can we help?" "I need a consultation with Ms. Reed as soon as possible," Arya said. "My name is Arya Monroe. My husband is Dorian Hale." Silence, the respectful kind. "Ms. Monroe, we can see you at 2, if that is acceptable." "It is." She spent the hours between appointment and inevitability assembling a war kit, tax statements, phone photographs, a sketchbook she'd once used for nursery plans, now full of itemized betrayals in her slanted hand. She texted Sloane, 2 o'clock, Cassandra. Sloane replied with a string of knives and a heart. In the mirror, Arya tied her hair back into a clean, decisive bun. She chose a royal blue sheath, modest, immaculate. Women had been told for centuries that softness wins. Sometimes softness is the sheath. Sometimes softness is the illusion you let the room believe while you sharpen the blade under the table. She put on small diamond studs, the pair she'd bought for herself the year she realized waiting for a gift meant inviting a disappointment. The elevator to Cassandra Reed's 32nd floor office rose like a held breath. Reception smelled faintly of lemons and law. The view through the river across glass as if the city were a legal exhibit. When Cassandra entered the conference room, she didn't waste adjectives. "Ms. Monroe," she said, hand warm, grip steady. "Tell me everything you know and everything you fear." Arya told her about the ballroom, the balcony, the red dress, the 3 years of politely curated loneliness. Then the files, the transfers, the burner phone. She slid her camera across, and Cassandra scrolled without blinking, her mind a ledger with a conscience. "This is interesting," Cassandra said finally, which in lawyer meant useful artillery. "I will have my forensic accountant, Ethan Park, review these immediately. We don't blackmail, Ms. Monroe. We posture with truth. If Mr. Hale has misused corporate funds, the board will be alert to the optics. That positions us well for a fair settlement without a spectacle. Are you ready for a war that looks like paperwork?" "I married into a war that looked like philanthropy," Arya said. "Paperwork I can do." Cassandra's mouth tipped, almost a smile. "Good. Here's what happens next. You do nothing that can be spun as vindictive. You do nothing alone. You do not confront Ms. Vance. Your husband will call. He will cajole. He will cry. You will not respond. Everything comes through me. Understood?" "Understood." "Also," Cassandra added, tapping one nail against the table like punctuation, "you shine. You keep attending the parties, the lunches, whatever calendar of optics this city runs on. You are not the wife who disappeared. You are the wife who outshone the smoke machine. That matters to juries and to boards alike." A laugh, unexpected, honest, escaped Arya. "I can do shine." When she stepped back into the elevator, she looked less like a woman leaving a lawyer's office and more like a woman walking into opening night. On the sidewalk, the wind found her hairline and cooled a heat she hadn't realized was rising. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dorian. "Dinner tonight? Just us. I miss you." She typed and erased, then typed the only true sentence that served her. "Not tonight. I'm busy." She put the phone away and booked a suite downtown for a month with a credit card Dorian didn't control. She called the house manager and arranged for her personal things to be packed and sent with discretion. She texted Sloane an address. Sloane responded, "I'm bringing ice cream in a bat." For metaphor. Probably. At dusk, the Aurelia Grand's after coverage began appearing on social feeds. The governor shaking hands. The orchestra's final bow. Dorian, immaculate at a microphone. And Arya, caught in a photograph between chandeliers, glowing in emerald with a smile that made strangers type queen in the comments. In one frame, in the far background, Lila's red dress bled like a rumor no one could quite crop. Alone in her new suite, Arya slipped off her heels and set her emerald gown across a velvet bench. The city scrolled its light outside the windows like a marquee that had just learned her name. She washed her face not to erase the evening, but to claim it clean. She ate ice cream out of a paper pint while Sloane narrated fantasies that ended with metaphors and new furniture. They laughed until their sides ached because laughter is a weapon too, the kind that slices through fear without drawing blood. And when midnight edged the windows with deeper blue, Sloane slept on the couch, fierce and soft at once, and Arya stood barefoot on polished wood, feeling the floor's cool certainty. Tomorrow would be accountants and affidavits. Next week would be negotiations and optics. Someday soon would be the board, perhaps the press, perhaps a courtroom. But tonight belonged to the woman who had refused to vanish, who had walked into a ballroom and kept her crown by refusing to beg for it. Arya Monroe turned out the lights and let the city hold her. Somewhere across town, a man in a beautiful suit believed he still ran the table. He had no idea the game had shifted. The queen had moved. The board would follow. Morning in the city can feel like absolution. Even the sirens sound new. Arya woke to pale light ribboning over the hotel's velvet drapes and the clean, decisive quiet of a room that belonged only to her. No monogram bathrobes with his initials. No echo of his cologne turning the closet into a shrine. She brewed the complimentary coffee, grimaced at its earnest mediocrity, and drank half anyway. Today wasn't about taste. Today was about tempo. By 8:30 a.m., Ethan Park had the files. He was younger than Arya expected when Cassandra introduced them in the conference room. Mid-30s, clear-framed glasses, the polite intensity of a man for whom numbers had always been truer than conversations. "I'm a little obsessive," he warned, stacking printed statements into categories so precise they looked preordained. "If there's a pattern, I'll find it. If there's a story, the ledger will tell it." "Good," Cassandra said, sliding him a thin folder labeled Hail. Personal v. Corporate. "We need a story that holds under floodlights." He skimmed the credit card charges first, lips moving almost imperceptibly as he did math in his head, the way musicians hum. "Restaurants near the office," he narrated. "Hotels 3 blocks from Hale Tower. Jewelry flagged client appreciation that doesn't correspond to any client roster I can find. And these," he tapped a column of transfers, "are spirit level off. Funds moving from the foundation's discretionary account to a consulting entity called Redline Forward LLC. I'll need hours, but my bet? Redline is a shell." Arya kept her face composed. Inside, something cold and righteous aligned. She had never wanted her marriage to become discovery. She had never hoped to be right about suspicion. But if truth demanded arithmetic, she would not look away from the equation that solved her life. Cassandra chose that moment to turn to Arya. 2 tracks, she said, crisp as a checklist. Track 1, financial leverage to secure a fair and quiet settlement. Track 2, optics. You will not disappear. In fact, you will be seen. Arya blinked. Seen how? Lunch with Marjorie Lowell, Cassandra replied as if scheduling weather. She has 2 hobbies, philanthropy and information. You will look unruffled. You will speak about art classes for underfunded schools. You will not mention Lila Vance. You will not mention a divorce, but you will be luminous. Can you do luminous on short notice? Arya smiled. I can do luminous with jet lag. Excellent. Noon at La Seraphine. Sloane will meet you at 11 with a dress. Ethan, I want a preliminary memo by 4. 4, Ethan echoed, already halfway inside a spreadsheet only he could see. When Arya stepped onto the sidewalk, the city met her with its usual indifference, which felt today like a blessing. She walked 3 extra blocks to feel her legs belonged to her. The hotel's revolving door admitted her back into a lobby that smelled like citrus and possibility. Sloane was waiting in a corner banquette, a garment bag draped like a secret across the seat. I brought armor, Sloane announced, unzipping to reveal a cream silk dress that floated when she shook it, and a pair of gold slingbacks that looked like applause. Also, she added, pressing a velvet box into Arya's hand, earrings from a woman-owned studio, ethically sourced stones, 0 Dorian. Arya laughed, real and startled, the kind of laugh rooms keep for themselves. You're ridiculous. I'm necessary, Sloane corrected cheerfully. Now give me your face. They did makeup like a ritual, foundation the color of certainty, a sweep of liner steady as a signature, a red lip that nodded to last night's dress and insisted on a new narrative. When they were done, Arya looked like herself, and also like an updated edition. Same spine, better margins. La Seraphine made its living selling salads to power and power to itself. Marjorie arrived in a cloud of floral silk and intention. "Darling," she declared, air-kissing both of Arya's cheeks. "You were a poem last night. I told everyone I invented you." "That's generous," Arya said, meaning not a syllable but granting the currency. They ordered the kind of frisee that pretends penance is delicious, and Marjorie began her favorite sport. "How are you?" she asked, the "you" elongated, gift-wrapped, barbed. "Busy," Arya said, selecting her words the way a watchmaker selects a spring. The Hale Foundation's arts initiative is at a beautiful inflection point. Schools are ready to partner. Donors are engaged. "Oh, the foundation," Marjorie cooed, eyes glittering. "And Dorian." Arya took a sip of sparkling water. Bubbles rose like the urge to say everything. She swallowed both. "Working," she said. "You know Dorian." Marjorie said, which meant she knew at least two versions. "And that new one in marketing. Lena? Lulu?" "Lila," Arya supplied, tone as bland as porcelain. "I'm afraid I don't know the staff roster these days." Marjorie leaned back, appetite for gossip licking at her teeth. "You always were more gracious than the sport deserves. The city was buzzing, dear." Arya tilted her head, smiling. "The city buzzes about weather when it's bored. I prefer forecasts I can control." Marjorie gave a short, appreciative laugh. She'd gotten a soundbite to carry to her cauldron. More importantly, she'd gotten nothing else. Lunch passed in a gentle duel of harmless anecdotes and weaponized compliments. When it ended, Marjorie air-kissed again and promised to do something intimate for the arts initiative, by which she meant a party with photographers. Back in the lobby, Arya texted Cassandra. "Optics complete." Marjorie fed and watered. Cassandra responded with a thumbs up and a calendar link like a hug in her dialect. A minute later, Ethan called. "I have your story," he said without greeting. "Redline Forward is a Delaware LLC formed 18 months ago by Everett Klein, Dorian's college friend who's been a ghost in 3 of his side ventures. Redline invoice numbers match memo lines in Hale Foundation transfers. The invoices are for strategic donor development. There's no deliverable. Where did the money go? 2 outflows. One to a luxury travel agency, one to a jewelry wholesaler. Both in Miami. Both coinciding with dates from Mr. Hale's calendar, where he was allegedly in New York." Arya closed her eyes. Heat flared at the base of her throat. "How much?" "Conservatively, 1. 2 million across 18 months, she exhaled. "And the corporate side?" "Similar shell. Atlas Ridge Consulting, billing Hale Enterprises for market analysis. The funds move, then halt in a personal account in the Caymans under D. Weston. Weston is Dorian's mother's maiden name." Silence. Then Ethan, gentler. "I'll draft a summary and send it to Cassandra. We can move as early as tomorrow." "Do it," Arya said. "Thank you." "Numbers don't lie," Ethan replied. "People do." They moved the next morning. Cassandra insisted on choreography. A courier serving divorce papers at Hale Tower precisely 20 minutes after Cassandra and Arya took seats in Dorian's office. "Theatrics are vulgar," Cassandra said, "unless they are effective. Today, theatrics will be effective." Hale Tower's 20th floor had been designed to look like a victory speech. Glass, steel, views that made even the river improve its posture. Amanda, Dorian's assistant, blinked when Arya and Cassandra arrived. "Mrs. Hale," she said, surprised into honesty. "He's in a board strategy session." "We'll wait in his office," Cassandra said, not asking. Amanda hesitated for the length of a career calculation and then nodded. "Of course." Dorian's office felt like a spread in a magazine about power that believed its own myths. Photographs of handshakes, awards for benevolence framed in expensive humility. On a credenza, a picture of Dorian and Arya at a ribbon cutting, her smile bright enough to light a smaller city. Arya looked at the woman in the frame with a tenderness that was not nostalgia. She didn't pity that Arya. She was proud of her for surviving long enough to become this one. The door opened on laughter. Dorian entered with 3 board members in his wake, each smelling faintly of bespoke and appetite. He was mid-sentence when he saw Cassandra. The rest of the sentence died like a moth in winter. His gaze flicked to Arya, and for a split second, the boy with pizza sauce was back, lost and certain she would save him. "Gentlemen," Cassandra said, voice velvet over steel, "would you excuse us? We need a moment with Mr. Hale." The board members looked at Dorian. Dorian tried for equanimity and landed on pallor. "I'll join you shortly," he said. They left, curiosity leaking like perfume. "What is this?" he asked once the door clicked shut, smile tight as a tourniquet. "Introduction," Cassandra said, offering a hand she had no intention of letting him shake. "Cassandra Reed, counsel to Ms. Monroe." "Ms." He swallowed. "Arya, what are we doing?" "Ending a lie," Arya said calmly, "and beginning a negotiation." Right on cue, the courier knocked and handed Dorian a heavy envelope. He stared at it as if it might contain a more favorable reality. "You served me at my office," he said, looking up, shock widening to offense. "Do you have any idea?" "Yes," Cassandra said. "We have an excellent idea. You will keep your voice low." He opened the envelope, scanned too fast to read, then tossed it onto the desk as if paper could bruise. "A divorce," he said, as though the word were a stranger trespassing in his mouth. "This is performative, Arya. We can discuss." "No," she said. "We can negotiate, but I won't discuss." He tried the smile that had had its own PR team for years. "I made mistakes. I'm sorry. Let's—" "Your apologies are misfiled," Cassandra cut in. "Please review Exhibit C." He flipped to the tab because compliance with formidable women was a reflex he hadn't unlearned. His eyes moved, and with them the blood, draining from his face in obedient retreat. "Red line," he said. "Ethan Park. Cassandra, this is a misinterpretation. Of invoices written by your friend Everett Klein, billed to your foundation for services never rendered, matched to purchases for travel and jewelry coinciding with Ms. Vance's calendar?" Cassandra's smile did not reach the neighborhood of her eyes. "Please don't insult the math. It has better manners than this." Dorian's jaw worked. He looked at Arya, searching for a version of her that would mediate. He found only the woman who had learned the rules he'd lived by and now played them with more elegance. "You won't take me to war," he said quietly, a last-ditch hope disguised as threat. "I won't need to," Arya answered. "You will take yourself." Cassandra placed a second folder on the desk. "Here are Ms. Monroe's terms. They are fair, given community property statutes and the possibility of criminal exposure if the board becomes fully apprised of your extracurricular accounting. If you sign, we will proceed privately, efficiently. If you resist, we will share our findings with the board and, regretfully, with the appropriate regulators." He stared at the folder as if flipping it would flip the day. "I built this company," he whispered, and the sentence hung there. Proof that he still believed building conferred absolution. "You built it with a team," Arya said, voice even, "and you endangered it alone." Silence. Outside, the city moved money in buses and lives. Inside, a man measured the distance between arrogance and outcome. "I need time," he said. "You have 48 hours," Cassandra replied, "after which we assume you prefer a public forum." He nodded once, as if congratulating himself for still being in the chair. "Fine, 48. Cassandra stood. Arya did not. She walked to the credenza and picked up the ribbon-cutting photo, then set it down precisely 1 inch to the left. "Straightening things," she said, and left with Cassandra before he could parse the metaphor. In the hallway, Arya's fingers trembled. Cassandra's hand landed, brief and steady, on her shoulder. "You were perfect," the attorney said. "Now go be seen again. We starve predators by lighting the room." For 48 hours, Arya lived 2 lives. In one, she became busy publicly. She toured an arts classroom in Southside Elementary, knees bent to look a kid named Jasmine in the eye, as the girls showed her a crooked watercolor of a house with a yard the color of hope. She spoke at a brunch about the way sculpture can teach patience to hands that have only ever learned hurry. She sat front row at a small theater's fundraiser, laughed in the right places, donated a sum precise enough to feel generous and not vindictive. In the other life, She sat on her suite's floor with contracts spread like a tarot of futures and worked with Sloane to inventory what she was keeping. Art, a car, the condo in Soho she'd secretly loved more than the mansion because it had a noise the mansion couldn't buy. She signed things. She initialed things. She slept in 4-hour stretches that felt like expiration dates. On the second evening, Dorian sent a message through Cassandra. Meet. Cassandra refused his first 3 venues, his office, his club, a private dining room with too many exits. My conference room, she countered. 30 minutes. You bring your lawyer. Dorian arrived with Richard Sterling, a man whose hair had been salt since the 90s and whose voice had a silver spoon tucked into it. He shook Cassandra's hand with the exaggerated respect men use when they discover they are not the most competent person in the room. We'll accept most of the financials, Sterling began, but the NDA language is too restrictive. Mr. Hale lives a public life. He can't be muzzled. Mr. Hale forfeited the right to narrate Ms. Monroe's life when he began living a second one, Cassandra said. The NDA stands. Sterling leaned back. You are asking my client to admit to impropriety that has not been proved. No, Cassandra said, flipping a page. We are asking him to accept the reality of impropriety that would, if proved, end his career. We are sparing him the proof. Throughout, Dorian kept glancing at Arya, as if she might reach across and restore him. She didn't. When Sterling paused to murmur with him, Dorian lowered his voice. Arya, please. 18 months of stupidity. Don't erase 7 years. I'm not erasing, she said. I'm archiving. Something in him sagged. Pride? Pretend? He nodded at Sterling. Sign the NDA. Sterling blinked, surprised, then moved briskly to salvage dignity through speed. While he and Cassandra traded language like chess moves, Dorian leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice a private echo. Do you remember the blanket at the reservoir? He asked, sudden and disarming, summoning a day when they'd been 19, and certain that the word forever had read their palms and found them lucky. I remember, Arya said, because she wasn't cruel. I meant it, he whispered. So did I, she answered. He looked up, eyes glassy with a grief that might have been real, might have been performance, might have been both. I don't know how to be a person without you. You'll learn, she said softly. I did. Cassandra slid the final page forward. Mr. Hale. He took the pen like a man being handed his own verdict. He signed, he dated, he exhaled. When Sterling finished notarizing, Cassandra gathered the stack, neat and lethal. We'll file with the court in the morning, she said. You will receive executed copies. Sterling tried to reclaim terrain. This concludes the domestic matter, he said. Any business allegations? Are none of our concern, Cassandra finished smoothly, unless forced. They stood. Dorian didn't. He looked at Arya the way people look at a house as movers carry out the last box. I'm sorry, he said, and for a flicker of a second, Arya believed he meant it in more than the transactional sense. I forgive you, she said, because she needed the weight back from where she'd been carrying it. But forgiveness isn't reunion. It's release. She walked out. Cassandra fell into step. In the elevator, Arya's body remembered to shake. Cassandra handed her a tiny bottle of water that had appeared from nowhere. Arya drank half and laughed, the sound high and soft and a little wild. What? Cassandra asked, amused. I'm thinking about something you said, Arya replied. About starving predators by lighting the room. I think I've been living in a dimmer switch for years. Welcome to On, Cassandra said. Ikki the city adjusted. Word, a rumor with a pedigree, moved through donor circles and boardrooms. Amicable separation, mutual respect, no drama. It was the kind of lie everyone wanted to believe because it made the room feel civilized. Arya did not correct them. She smiled, wrote checks to music programs, thanked florists for arrangements she hadn't ordered, and stopped answering numbers she didn't recognize. The papers were filed, the headlines did not bloom, and for one suspended moment, it seemed possible that endings could be private when they had been lived in public. Then Hale Enterprises leaked. It started as a paragraph in the city ledger. Sources indicate the Hale board will conduct a routine review of discretionary expenditures in the coming quarter. Routine. Review. Words that belong to a world where nothing is routine and review means triage. By evening, 2 more outlets called it heightened scrutiny. Someone whispered red line forward into a reporter's ear. Someone else mouthed Atlas Ridge. The stock dipped like a curtsy that failed to stop at elegance. Cassandra texted one word, hold. Sloan arrived with Thai food and a grin that meant trouble. If his board burns, I brought marshmallows. Arya smiled and didn't. It wasn't that she wanted Dorian ruined. It was that she wanted the truth to stop pretending it wasn't there. I don't want fire, she said. I want consequences. Sloan saluted with a chopstick. Consequences, coming right up. That night alone, Arya opened a sketchbook. Not a ledger of betrayal this time. A real sketchbook. Pages thirsty for graphite. She began to draw. A room awash in morning. A long table with light like honey. Chairs that held bodies without reminding them they had been tense all day. She drew a small studio, a place that smelled like wood shavings and paint thinner, where she could consult on color as if color were a language, and she, finally, was done translating herself for a speaker who never learned her grammar. Her phone buzzed across the desk. Unknown. She almost tossed it into a drawer. Then she answered. Arya. Lila's voice, lacquered and trembling. Please don't hang up. Arya closed her eyes, counted to 3. You have 30 seconds. I didn't call to fight, Lila said, words spilling, frightened. The board, they called me in. HR, too. They're looking at expenses. I could lose my job. Dorian told me it was all above board, that red line was legit, that the foundation covered travel when it involved donors. He told you a lot, Arya said, not unkind, not gentle either. I'm not asking you to save me, Lila whispered. I wanted you to know I'm not a villain. I made a mistake. I believed him. Arya thought about 19 in a checkered blanket and how easy it is to confuse the confidence of a man with the certainty of a truth. We all believe things we shouldn't, she said at last. Then we pay tuition. On the other end of the line, Lila sobbed, quiet as apology. I'm sorry, she managed. For what it's worth. Good night, Lila, Arya said, and ended the call before compassion could be mistaken for invitation. She returned to the sketchbook. Her pencil softened corners, widened windows. She shaded a stretch of wall where morning could paint itself new every day. When she finally slept, it was with a plan humming under her sternum, small and insistent as a bird. At 9:17 the next morning, Cassandra called. The board has retained outside counsel, she said, voice like a metronome. They'll announce an internal review at noon. For now, you remain Switzerland. You will receive press calls. You will not answer. If cornered, you'll say, I wish the company well. That's it. Understood, Arya said. And Arya, Cassandra added softer, you are allowed to have feelings about this without acting them out in public. I'll have them in private, Arya promised. Noon came. The board statement was 5 paragraphs of deliberate bland. We are committed to best practices. We are reviewing. We are proud of our philanthropic impact. Reporters aggregated. Social media did its gossip math. Some of the photos from the charity ball resurfaced. Dorian at the microphone. Arya radiant. Lila read as a headline. Comment sections wrote their poems. Arya turned off her phone and went to Southside Elementary to meet Jasmine's art teacher about sourcing brushes that didn't shed optimism onto every page. At dusk, as she walked back to the hotel with the lights slanting warm across the avenue, a text arrived from a number Cassandra had whitelisted. Board wants a meeting. Private. 10 a.m. tomorrow. No counsel. Informal, Cassandra called before Arya could type. You will not meet them alone, she said. They know better than to ask. I'll attend. They said informal, Arya said. They say informal when they mean, we hope you'll say something we can't subpoena. 10 a.m., I'll be there. Arya laughed, a tired sound with resolve at its edges. Have I told you I'm grateful for you? Once, Cassandra said dryly. I prefer monthly. The hotel bar was half full of men in loosened ties congratulating themselves for surviving another day of capitalism. Arya ordered tea. She didn't want drink to borrow her calm at a usurious rate. She took her cup to a corner table and opened the sketchbook again. On a fresh page, she drew a door. Wide, tall, unafraid. And above it, in tiny script, a word she hadn't let herself write in years. studio. Somewhere downtown, Dorian sat in a conference room, pretending not to sweat. Somewhere midtown, a board rehearsed phrases like continuity and fiduciary duty in leadership transition, the way choirs rehearse their harmonies before the audience arrives. Somewhere uptown, Lila stared at a ceiling fan and tried not to imagine the word terminated in an email subject line. Here in a hotel where no one knew her room number and the city's murmurs softened to a lullaby, Arya planned a life that did not require permission. Tomorrow would be strategy again. The day after, maybe strategy still. But the chapter had turned with that first step into the ballroom, and every page since had taught her a grammar she now spoke without translation. The language of composure, the syntax of consequence, the poetry of leaving without losing herself. At 10 a.m., she would walk into a room and say nothing more than she needed to. At noon, she would buy brushes that didn't shed. At dusk, she would draw a second door. And one day, very soon, she would walk through it. At 9:58 a.m., Arya stood with Cassandra Reed outside a smoked glass conference room whose view could make anyone feel small enough to behave. The carpet was the careful gray of enterprises that want to look sober without admitting fear. A woman at reception whispered into a headset, glanced at Arya, and straightened like decor under inspection. "Two rule," Cassandra murmured. 1, I speak first and last. 2, silence is not absence, it's leverage. If you must answer, answer like a witness. Only what was asked, nothing more. Arya nodded. She had dressed in maroon, authoritative, not aggressive, with a thin gold necklace that sat on her collarbone like punctuation. Her palms were dry. Her pulse was steady in the dignified way of someone who has rehearsed the worst thing and found it survivable. The door opened. Chairman Lowell, Marjorie's husband, the kind of man who had learned to weaponize affability, gestured them in. Around the table sat 4 board members, an outside counsel with an immaculate part, and Ellen Cho, Hale's CFO, whose neat bun suggested she slept with spreadsheets under her pillow. "Ms. Monroe, Ms. Reed," Lowell began, coating each syllable in warm varnish. "We appreciate your time." "Of course," Cassandra replied, tone surgical. "You requested informal. We're here to listen." Lowell spread his hands. "A man auditioning for benevolent. We're conducting an internal review of discretionary expenditures. Routine, as you know." They all knew it wasn't routine. "We understand there was a private marital settlement. We have no interest in the particulars. We do, however, hope to avoid misunderstandings that could harm employees or the foundation." Translation: "Tell us what you know so we can triage, but don't give us anything we'd need to disclose in discovery." Cassandra gave him a smile that belonged on a chessboard. "We respect the company's process. Ms. Monroe has no desire to harm Hale's rank and file. Her priority is and has always been the community served by the foundation." Ellen Cho leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Ms. Monroe, did you at any time authorize or participate in foundation expenditures to Redline Forward LLC?" "No," Arya said, voice clear. "I was not involved in day-to-day disbursements." "Were you aware of Atlas Ridge Consulting invoices paid by Hale Enterprises?" "No." "To you? Did you benefit personally from travel or gifts associated with those entities?" "No." "Do you have any documentation related to those payments?" Cassandra's hand lifted a millimeter. "If the board would like to issue a formal request through counsel, we will consider it. My client will not be making informal evidentiary productions." Outside counsel's pen stopped mid-note. He looked up. Cassandra did not blink. Lowell tried a softer route. "Arya, if I may, our goal is continuity. We're proud of the foundation's impact. We assume you are too. If there are suggestions you'd make, steps that would ensure donor confidence." Arya turned to him, unhurried. "Separate the foundation's executive oversight from Hale Enterprises," she said. "Independent audit committee, transparent vendor bidding, publish disbursements above a threshold, and ensure the next CEO knows the difference between generosity and theater." A beat. Then Lowell actually laughed, short and genuine. "Noted." They released her after 27 minutes, long enough to probe, too short to trap. As the door shut behind them, Arya let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been rationing. "You were perfect," Cassandra said again, the phrase now a mantra. They wanted contrition or confession. You gave them governance. They'll remove him, Arya said, not triumphant, only tired. They'll vote when the narrative demands it, Cassandra replied. And the narrative is forming. They rode the elevator in companionable silence. On the ground floor, Cassandra's phone buzzed. She scanned the screen and arched an eyebrow. Speaking of narrative, City Ledger has a new piece queued, anonymous sourcing about shell vendors and irregular reimbursements. She slid the phone away. Stay small. Let the storm find its own edge. I'm done being the weather, Arya said. I'm building a roof. By afternoon, she was measuring sunlight. The listing had promised 2,100 square feet with southern exposure and bones that whispered before it was expensive. Brick walls with paint ghosts, a loading bay useful for large canvases and life, a mezzanine that could cradle a library of materials, and a kettle for tea. The agent kept talking. Zoning, foot traffic, what the previous tenant left that could be negotiated, while Arya paced with a small tape measure and the attention of a watchmaker. This corner is for client tables, she murmured, half to herself. Raw oak, matte sealer, chairs that invite people to stay long enough to change their minds. That wall wants flat files. The north wall gets pegboard. Tools visible, touchable. The floor, leave it. Scars are honest. You see it? The agent said, equal parts relief and awe. I do, Arya answered, which was another way of saying I see myself here. What's the number? He told her. She did quick math. Retainer from a Soho client she'd kept quiet. A personal line of credit approved on name recognition she hadn't asked for, but accepted. The cushion Cassandra had carved into the settlement. It fit if she committed. Draft the lease, she said. Name on the door, Monroe Atelier. Congratulations, the agent beamed. It's going to be something. It already is, Arya said, fingers splaying over brick. The wall was cool, the kind of cool that keeps summer bearable and winter honest. Outside, the late afternoon light made a promise to the windows. Inside, Arya sketched. The first draft of an entrance. A door wide enough for sculptures and strollers. A small brass plaque that would feel like a handshake. A bench for people who needed to sit with a color before they could speak it. Sloane arrived carrying iced coffees and a roll of painter's tape. Tell me we're taping out furniture footprints like lunatics. We're taping out furniture footprints like professionals, Arya corrected. Lunatics go diagonal. They measured. They laughed. They argued amiably about a corridor width as if it were a policy position. At one point, Sloane sat in an imaginary chair and declared the imagined view acceptable. From here, she said, you look like a woman who won't accept less than she gives. Arya pressed her palm flat to the floor. Dust marked her lifeline. For the first time in years, she said softly, everything I want fits in a room. Sloane considered. A large room, she amended, with correct ceiling height. They worked until blue slipped into the windows. When the agent returned with a preliminary lease, Arya signed with the same steadiness she'd carried into the boardroom. Commitment didn't scare her. Pretending had. Keys by Friday, the agent promised. We'll swap locks. Friday, Arya repeated. Good. On the walk back to the hotel, she passed Southside Elementary. In a classroom window, construction paper suns beamed above stick figures holding hands. She snapped a photo and texted Jasmine's teacher. Brushes sourced. Delivery Monday. Also, we'll host the kids at the atelier when we open. Let them pin their work on our wall first. The reply came fast. You'll break them in the right ways, the kind that makes room for bigger hearts. Arya smiled, unexpectedly shy at praise that felt different from society's scripted applause. In the elevator, she scrolled the day reverse, like rewinding a ribbon, the boardroom's polite theater, Cassandra's shield, the space, tape on concrete, a signature that felt like unghosting. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown. She almost ignored it. Curiosity won by a hair. She answered. This is Arya. Ms. Monroe, said a careful voice. It's Ellen Cho, the CFO. I hope this isn't an imposition, Ellen continued. I wanted to thank you for not lighting a match in that room, for setting terms without spectacle. Awam. I didn't do it for Hale, Arya said. I did it for the people who didn't ask to be collateral. I know, Ellen said, and the fatigue in that reply told Arya more than any article could. The board will convene a special session by week's end. Off the record, if there is anything else we should see, now would be the time to consider making sure it is seen. Off the record? Arya asked, amused. Is that how we're playing this? A pause that sounded like a smile. We all have languages we were forced to learn, Ellen said. Mine is compliance. Yours appears to be poised with a subscript of fire. Arya considered, then chose the line Cassandra would approve. Our council will respond to formal requests. I wish the company well. I expected as much, Ellen said, still kind. For what it's worth, I hope the foundation survives this with its soul intact. So do I. She hung up and immediately texted Cassandra. Ellen called. Friendly, fishing without a net. I said the line. Cassandra replied with a single checkmark. And then, proud of you. The room was suddenly too quiet for a body that had held composure all day. Arya kicked off her shoes and let the city's hum filter in. The TV on mute showed a news crawl. Hale Enterprises announces internal review. File footage. Dorian shaking hands. Dorian cutting a ribbon. Dorian at the charity ball. Arya in emerald at his side. Luminous as a hypothesis proven true. She watched herself in that loop and felt something unclasp. The woman in the footage had been an accessory to a story written for her. The woman on the couch was an author outlining chapters. Her phone chirped. Marjorie Lowell. Of course. Dinner soon? I want to hear about your art classrooms. Everyone does. Arya typed, next week. I'm in build mode. But yes, soon. Marjorie replied with 3 exclamation points and a heart, as if hearts were party favors. Arya closed her eyes. Behind her lids, layouts assembled. Reception, sample library, studio bay. A small alcove where she could breathe between clients and courts of opinion. When she opened them, the city was still there, as patient as structure. 2 days later, the keys were in her hand. Real, weighty, cold as promise. She arrived at Monroe Atelier with drop cloths and a portable speaker, the humble theater of beginnings. Sloane showed up carrying a toolbox she used like punctuation. Jasmine's teacher wheeled in a cart with boxes of brushes, each tied with bright ribbon. At noon, a delivery man brought sandwiches and smiled at the way the room already felt like intention. They painted. They argued with blue tape. They laughed at a stubborn patch of wall that refused to behave until Arya threatened it with wallpaper. The floor bore the story of their progress. Footprints, fumbles, a handprint Sloane swore she'd leave forever because we should remember the day we put our hands on it. During a tea break perched on upside-down paint buckets, Sloane asked, "What are you calling your first showcase?" Afterlight, Arya said, surprising herself with how ready the word had been. Rooms that learn to hold what comes after breaking. Sloane exhaled. God, that's you. It's a lot of people, Arya said. We'll start with spaces for people doing hard beginnings. Nonprofits, small clinics, 2 pro bono projects a quarter, folded into the books right, not as charity theater. You'll ruin me, Sloane said, teary in the way of women who guard their softness with jokes. Promise me we'll also design 1 ridiculous powder room with hand-painted snakes. We'll do 2, Arya smiled. Symmetry. Her phone rang. Ethan Park. Cassandra asked me to loop you in, he said. The board now has everything they need to remove him with cause. They'll offer an orderly transition to keep markets calm. And Dorian? She asked, the name feeling like a dead language she still understood. His counsel is negotiating resignation terms. It won't be public yet, but the tide has a schedule. Thank you, Arya said, for being a human calculator with a conscience. Ethan hesitated, then added quietly, numbers tell a story. Most people only let them tell the profitable parts. You didn't. She hung up and looked around the room. Sun pooled on the concrete like a benediction. Sloane was humming off key. The brush cart stood like a small monument to promises kept. On the far wall, Arya had chalked the atelier's credo in neat script. Make it honest. Make it hold. Make it generous. A soft knock at the loading bay door. Sloane glanced over. Expecting anyone? Arya shook her head and crossed the room. When she rolled the door up, late afternoon light framed a man in a city maintenance vest holding a clipboard. He had kind eyes and the weary humor of someone who had seen elevators misbehave and kept his faith in gravity anyway. "Ms. Monroe?" he asked. "Miguel Navarro, building engineer. I just wanted to introduce myself and make sure you know where the shut-off valves are before you start plugging in the Empire." "God, yes, please show me valves," Sloane said from behind Arya. "We almost flooded a salon once." Miguel smiled. He walked them through practicals: water, electric, the temperamental loading dock sensor. His hands moved like someone who respected systems. Before he left, he paused. "My wife runs an after-school program around the corner," he said. "If you ever want kids to see how a space gets made, not just how it looks when it's finished, she'd bring them. It helps to see grown-ups measure twice." Arya's answer was immediate. "Yes, bring them next week. We'll make them supervisors and pay in pizza." Miguel's grin was a sun breaking through city cloud. "Deal." After he left, Sloane elbowed her, stage whispering, "If you don't marry a building engineer who says things like, 'measure twice,' I will." Arya laughed. "I'm marrying a door," she said, and patted the new frame. "And a table. And a very nosy neighborhood." They worked until the light turned amber, and the walls felt like they belonged to people again. When they finally rolled the drop cloths and locked up, Arya lingered a moment in the doorway. The sign over her head was temporary vinyl, but the name on it felt permanent in her mouth. She slept that night like a person who trusts the morning. Morning brought headlines. Hale Enterprises announces leadership transition. Board cites commitment to best practices. The article read like corporate anesthesia. Gratitude for years of service, focus on future, confidence in interim leadership. It was the kind of press release no one believed and everyone quoted. 2 pages in, the city ledger let the truth cough once. Sources indicate the review uncovered significant irregularities in vendor payments. Her phone filled with messages she didn't want. She turned it face down and baked muffins in the petite kitchenette by the windows because butter and heat can be a prayer. When the timer chimed, she was smiling at nothing. At 10, Cassandra called. "It's done," she said. "He signed the resignation. The board will protect the foundation to protect themselves. You will receive no calls today that you need to answer." "Thank you," Arya said. The words felt insufficient and exactly right. "Have you told Sloane the news?" Cassandra asked. "She already sent me a gif of fireworks and a hedgehog in a crown." "Appropriate," Cassandra said dryly. Then softer. "Arya, when you cut the ribbon on your space, allow me the privilege of buying the first brush." Arya's throat tightened. "It's yours." They hung up. The city's hum found a higher key, the way sound does when relief shares a block with grief. Arya stood with a muffin in her hand and let both exist. She didn't want vengeance. She wanted closure. She had it now, wrapped in PR and necessity. That would have to be enough. At noon, Marjorie texted a link to a society blog, breathless with photos from the charity ball. "You truly outshone the room, my dear. We must channel this into something meaningful. Call me," Arya typed, then deleted, then sent, "I already am." She grabbed her tote, a canvas thing stained with color, and headed for Monroe Atelier. The door groaned like an old friend. Sunlight threw generous rectangles across the floor. The air held the hopeful scent of drying paint and new choices. On the long wall, she chalked a second word beneath the credo: Afterlight. She rolled the drop cloths back out and began laying down painter's tape in slow, straight lines. The first grid for the first installation. As she worked, she spoke the names of the people who had carried this with her. Cassandra, who stood between her and the wolves. Ethan, who made numbers tell the truth. Sloane, who believed before belief had furniture. Jasmine, who painted houses the color of hope. Ellen, who called from a ledger and sounded like a person. Miguel, who knew where the shut-off valves lived and offered children a tour of competence. At dusk, she stepped back and looked at the wall. It wasn't art, not yet. It was intention. It was the map of a future room that would hold strangers and make them feel like they belonged to themselves. Her phone vibrated on the sawhorse. A new text from a number labeled E. Cho. "For the record, personally, not professionally, I'm rooting for your studio. If you ever want a CFO to explain cash flow to teenagers, I volunteer as tribute. Aria smiled at the screen. We pay in pizza, she typed, and gratitude. I accept, Ellen replied. Aria locked up as the streetlights sequined the sidewalk. On the walk back, the city looked almost gentle, like a huge machine that occasionally remembers it was built by people stitching mornings to nights for the sake of something more than profit. On her hotel desk lay the ribbon-cutting photo from Dorian's credenza. She had taken it not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Tonight she slid it from its frame. On the back, in the neat handwriting that had planned a wedding and a life, she wrote 2 words. Thank you. Not for the hurt, not for the betrayal, for the lessons, for the chess, for the understanding that composure is not capitulation and planning is not coldness. It is love for your future self. She tucked the photo into a file labeled Archive and placed the file in the bottom drawer, behind tax returns and warranties, kept honest, no longer on display. Then she opened her sketchbook to a blank page. At the top she wrote, Grand Opening, Monroe Atelier. Below it, bullet points unfurled. Invite the South Side kids to hang first. Afterlight installation, rooms that learn to hold after breaking. Sloan on music and mischief. Ellen on pizza and cash flow. Press. None invited. If they show, they stand in the back like everyone else. Dress code, anything you can breathe in. Her phone chimed one last time. Miguel. My wife says Friday works for the kids' visit. Is it okay if a few parents tag along? Aria. Please, we'll hand them tape measures and authority. Miguel. Best combo I know. Aria laughed. She set an alarm for 6 a.m. when deliveries would begin and a day would stretch long enough to fit a future. She lay down, not exhausted so much as used, in the good way, like a tool finding the work it was forged for. Outside, the city kept its endless inventory of problems and wonders. Inside, a woman closed her eyes knowing exactly what door she would walk through tomorrow. The board had reckoned. The blueprint was drafted. The walls were almost dry. Tomorrow she would begin to hang the first pieces of Afterlight. And the room, the life, would start to hold. On Friday at 3:12 p.m., the kids arrived like weather, laughing, curious, and bright. Miguel Navarro held the door while a swirl of backpacks and sneakers flooded Monroe Atelier. Behind them came parents with the posture of people who had given up afternoons to stand in fluorescent-lit hallways and clap for paper crowns. Ellen Cho showed up with 2 boxy bags and a grin. Pizza and spreadsheets, she announced. I promise both. Aria had taped the words Afterlight across the long wall, each letter a negative space waiting to be filled. She handed out blue tape, pencils, and authority. You're supervisors, she told the kids. Your job is to tell us when the lines are true and when the light is wrong. A girl with hair in a constellation of beads, Jasmine, pressed her eye to a cheap level the way a scientist presses to a microscope. It's off, she declared. A little left. Aria nudged the tape. Like this? Perfect, Jasmine said solemnly, and then giggled at her own gravitas. While Sloan organized a painting station with the flair of a party conspirator, Ellen set 2 teens at a folding table with a Sharpie and a simple budget. Brushes, paint, pizza, paper towels. This is cash flow, she said, sketching arrows. Money in, money out. See this line? That's called reality. It always wins. At 5:30, the parents insisted on leaving so children could get into bed before the planet spun to tomorrow. Miguel lingered long enough to point at the new exit sign and say, if it blinks, don't panic. It always blinks when it's proud. Then they were gone, the atelier suddenly larger, the wall still humming with the echo of small decisions made with big care. Tomorrow, Sloan said, dropping onto a sawhorse like a queen onto a throne. You cut a ribbon without cutting yourself. Are you ready to be luminous for several consecutive hours? Aria wiped a stripe of paint from her wrist. I can do luminous with no sleep now. Growth, Sloan approved. Cassandra texted. Board voted. Leadership transition is official. Dorian slides out the back door at dawn. Aria nodded. The word relief didn't feel precise. This was quieter than that, like a knot laid down instead of sliced. She wasn't keeping score. She was closing a ledger. Wear the green, Sloane said and grinned at Arya's look. Reclamation, babe. The charity ball color. But this time it's your light. Saturday rose early and kind. Arya brewed strong coffee, wrote a short note to herself in the margin of her sketchbook, make it generous, and slipped into the dress Sloane steamed to perfection. Deep emerald, clean lines, pockets, Sloane's religion, a neckline that said power without apology. She clasped the thin silver bracelet Miguel's kids had braided with wire and beads the day before. She left her hair soft and sure. At 9, deliveries began. Frames, a borrowed projector, folding chairs that would look better full of people than they did stacked. Sloane tuned a playlist that sounded like Wednesday afternoons washed and ironed for Saturday night. Ellen arrived on her day off in dark jeans and an expression that could level negligence at 10 paces. She hung a simple sign on the door, Monroe Atelier, public welcome. At 10, the room filled with firsts. The first neighbor, a baker who brought lemon squares and asked about paint finishes. The first former client who hugged Arya and said, "Look what you built from what was broken." The first teenager who asked, "Do you pay interns?" And the second teen who answered their own question, "We accept pizza." At 11, Cassandra slipped in, sleek navy suit, flats that said battlefields require traction, an expression softer than Arya had ever seen her wear in public. "You look like aftermath and beginning," she murmured, hugging her once. "This room is the apology the city never gives." "Stay," Arya said. "Stay for the first talk. Try and stop me." At noon, when the sun was at a high, flattering angle, and the atelier smelled like sawdust and hope, Arya stepped forward and watched conversations hush with the ordinary grace of people making room for a voice. "Welcome," she said. "This is Afterlight, rooms that learn to hold what comes after breaking." She spoke without notes. She spoke like a person who had decided a year ago that if she ever stood here, she would not waste a syllable. She told them Afterlight wasn't a show so much as a practice, a way of designing spaces that remembered who walked in burdened and needed a place to set it down. She introduced the wall, empty letters waiting for artifacts, textures, small testimonies of repair. "We'll fill it all year," she said. "Pieces from shelters and clinics and classrooms, a dictionary of persistence written by hands we usually ask to be invisible." Then she nodded to Ellen, who raised a slice of whiteboard and talked about budgets like they were moral documents. She called up Sloane, who told the story of a tiny powder room with hand-painted snakes that gave a woman back the scandalous joy of laughing in her own house. Arya brought Jasmine to the front, forehead shiny, shoes scuffed, eyes ablaze, and let her tape the very first artifact, a small square of watercolor paper with a house so green it hurt. "It tilts a little," Jasmine announced to the room. "Like the earth," Arya said. "And still, home." The applause was soft and ridiculous and perfect. In the back, someone filmed. Arya clocked the camera and decided not to care. If the story spread, it would not be the old one. When she finished, Marjorie Lowell arrived on a swirl of silk, and the smell of cologne meant for Marquise. "Darling," she called, loud enough for an insert, and made her way to Arya with the entitlement of a woman who has never had to apologize for arriving late. "This is divine. Everyone's talking." "Let them," Arya said, smiling with precisely the wattage she meant. "There's a donation box by the door labeled brushes, not ballrooms." Marjorie's eyes widened in delight. "You are wicked," she whispered, and dropped a heavy envelope into the slot. "How fun." At 2, the baker brought a second tray of lemon squares, because the first had disappeared into teenagers and gossips. At 3, a couple with hands that found each other in the nervous way of people new to having something to lose, bought the smallest piece in the room. A framed page of notes Arya had written during a walkthrough of a shelter bedroom. A lamp that can be switched on from bed, a hook for a bag, a paint color that forgives tired hands. They paid in cash. "It's for our first place," the woman said. "It's everything." At 4, the lobby filled again, this time with people from Arya's former life. Wives who wore their diamonds like armor. Men who said construction timeline like a threat. Richard Sterling appeared at the edge of the crowd. Dorian's lawyer, hair silver, smile feral, only to find Cassandra by Arya's side. arms crossed in a manner that could hold a door shut. He retreated with a nod that acknowledged defeat dressed as politeness. By 5, the hum had settled into something warm. Aria watched Jasmine hold court for 3 donors in pastel jackets, explaining why a crooked line is sometimes the bravest thing. She watched Ellen text a photo of the box labeled brushes, not ballrooms, to someone who replied with a receipt screenshot and a heart. She watched Sloane take a call, speak 3 sentences, hang up, and then lean over to murmur, "Small crisis at the venue for tonight's gala. Lighting rig. I may have said I knew a woman who can fix light." Arya raised an eyebrow. "Sloane." "It's poetic," Sloane said. "Trust me." The Hale Foundation Gala had not been canceled. Of course it hadn't. The board had simply laundered it, scrubbed Dorian's name from the program, moved his speech into a paragraph about community voices, doubled the flower budget to smother the smell of panic. When Marjorie Lowell leaned close and said, "You must come. Oh, you must." Arya's first instinct was no. She owed that ballroom nothing. She owed herself mercy. Then she thought about Jasmine's watercolor on her wall and about light, how it belongs to whoever sets it right. "I'll come," she said, "for the foundation." At 7:30, Arya stepped into a car with Cassandra and Sloane and a tote bag that looked suspiciously like a toolkit. Ellen texted a picture of Miguel's teens eating pizza under the afterlight wall and wrote, "We kept the room warm for you." Arya rested a hand on the tote and nodded to no one. "Let's go measure twice." The Crystal Grand Hotel ballroom did what it always did. Mirrors, chandeliers, live jazz cleaned to within an inch of its life. For Arya, the room was an overlay. This year's flowers laid atop last year's betrayal. She inhaled, slow. The air tasted less like humiliation than she'd expected, and more like lemon polish and possibility. Whispers ticked around the edges like clocks. She's here, the wife, the ex, the one who left and didn't leave quietly. Arya met eyes without flinching. Smile, nod, keep moving. Marjorie swooped, kissed her cheeks, sang her name. "You stole the city this afternoon," she said with delight. "Now steal the night." "I'm not here to steal," Arya said. "I'm here to redirect." It happened during the opening remarks, of course. The lighting rig above the dais seized with a muted pop, and 1/3 of the room slipped into a gentle dusk. The band stopped pretending to improvise. People murmured about liability and refunds. A hotel manager materialized with a radio and an expression that said, "We have policy for this, but not prayer." "Permission?" Sloane asked, eyes dancing. "Go," Arya said, already walking toward the side door where staff disappeared. They found a service corridor, 2 anxious electricians, and a breaker panel with labels from a past life. Arya rested a hand on the cool metal, the way you greet an animal unsure of you. "You're fine," she told the panel. "You're just tired." The younger electrician blinked at her dress, then the bracelet, then the possibility that this woman could speak electricity. "Ma'am?" "Which circuits feed the dais?" Arya asked. When he pointed, she toggled off, waited 5 seconds, the respectful pause, and toggled on. The panel clicked. The rig hummed. In the ballroom, the chandeliers lifted their chins. The older electrician let out a low whistle. "Marry me," he deadpanned to Sloane. "She's taken," Sloane said solemnly, "by a door." They re-entered as the band slid seamlessly back into a swing number, pretending the darkness had been a bridge. Arya did not return to her table. She stopped at the edge of the dance floor and scanned the room until she found the oversight she was waiting for. A free microphone on a stand at the side of the stage, unattended, as if the night had been choreographed by people who believed only the invited could speak. Chairman Lowell was vamping about stewardship when he saw her. He faltered by a syllable. "And now, if I may, we'll begin with the community," Arya said, her voice carrying with the clean grace of a tested sound system. She stepped to the mic as if she had always been meant to stand there. "Tonight's program was supposed to start with a speech by a man who is not here. Instead, I'd like to start with a wall." The room shifted, curious, wary. She had no slides. She had the afterlight wall in her body. This afternoon, at a small studio on the east side, a girl hung a crooked watercolor of a greenhouse and called it home. She didn't ask for a gala. She asked for a brush that didn't shed. The Hale Foundation can do that. It can do 1,000 small, exact things. Lamps that switch on from bed, hooks on doors, paint that forgives. It can help rooms hold people when life tilts. That's what we're here for. Not theater, not photographs, the work. Silence, real silence, not the polite kind. Men stopped forming their next joke. Women stilled their fork and salad choreography. A server froze in place with a tray at half-mast. Arya did not look at Lila Vance, but suddenly Lila was there. In the periphery, red dress of the previous year, replaced with something black and sensible and earnest. She had a volunteer badge at her waist. Her eyes were damp and unlined by drama. For a moment, Arya felt the universe do an old trick well, bringing together people who needed to see one another's evolution. Arya went on, "If you're here to have your name on a banner, the catering is excellent. If you're here to build, we have a list. It starts with classrooms and clinics and shelters and ends never. That's what giving is. It isn't a night in a dress. It's Tuesday at 3 p.m. with a tape measure." The applause didn't break. It arrived whole. Not a cheer exactly. Something deeper. The bandleader put a hand over his heart. Cassandra didn't clap. She watched the room register a shift that could not be spun back to its former angle. Marjorie cried in the exquisite way of women whose mascara can take it. Ellen texted a photo of the chandelier back to the kids. She fixed the light here too. Replies stacked. Heart emojis. Tell her we said hi. Is there dessert? Can we come next year? Lowell returned to the mic like a man who had just been taught to pronounce stewardship. Thank you, Ms. Monroe, he said, bowing not theatrically, but, for once, appropriately. We'll begin as she said, with the work. He glanced at the program and then set it aside. Pledge cards are at your tables. The first line reads, brushes, not ballrooms. Someone laughed, then everyone did, and then wallets opened the way they rarely open for speeches about symmetry and tax deductions. A sponsor pledged an endowment for after-school studios. A dentist offered pro bono restorations for women trying to interview with teeth that told stories they didn't want to tell first. A contractor said, we'll renovate 2 shelter bathrooms at cost, and I will personally show up on Saturdays. Arya stepped back from the mic. Lila was there, directly in front of her now. Not dramatic, not pale, simply human. I'm volunteering tonight, Lila said, voice steady. I asked to, I'm sorry. Arya held her gaze for the exact right amount of time. The same way you hold a delicate glass until it chooses whether to break or ring. I hope someone gives you a room that holds, she said at last. Give others those rooms too. Lila nodded, tears bright but contained, and moved away to the check-in table where she found purpose in clipboards. Which, Sloane whispered, delighted. You turned a ball into a build site. Good, Arya said. Let them sweat in tuxedos. They danced not to outshine anyone, but because bodies need to remember they are allowed to be joyful while they work. Cassandra danced stiffly with Ellen, who loosened exactly one vertebra and called it celebration. Marjorie danced with a line of teenagers whose sneakers scuffed the marble like a signature. Somewhere, a board member called a contractor and changed a Monday agenda. Near midnight, the band slid into a slow standard. Arya stood at the edge of the floor and watched light behave. She thought of the first night she had stood in this room, committee perfect, watching a man's hand on another woman's back, while everything she had been told about composure crowded her throat. She thought of the second night, this one, where she had walked into the same lights with a different spine and turned the wattage on the right thing. She wasn't outshining the mistress, she was outshining the myth. Go home, Cassandra said softly, appearing at her elbow, eyes bright with something like pride disguised as fatigue. You've rebuilt enough for one day. Stay and schmooze for me? Arya asked. Cassandra snorted. I schmooze like a deposition. But yes. They hugged. Sloane pressed a lemon square into Arya's hand for the road and kissed her cheek. Ellen tapped the face of her watch the way mothers do and said, Sleep. Cash flow needs a CEO with clear eyes. Outside, the winter air did the generous thing where it remembered to be crisp but not cruel. Arya walked the 3 blocks to her car because boots and a good coat make 3 blocks into a liturgy. Her phone buzzed. Unknown. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Dorian could leave his messages in history. If he called to apologize, she already knew. If he called to accuse, the night was too tender to bruise. At home, she set the lemon square on a plate and her clutch on the counter and the two-line note she'd scribbled for her future self where she would see it in the morning. Make it honest. Make it hold. She slept hard for once, without the busy dreams of strategy or the brittle ones of hindsight. In the morning, her body woke before her alarm, the way bodies do when they are done running from themselves. She dressed in work clothes, denim and a dark sweater with the softness of a well-earned second chance, and went to the atelier. Sunlight had already arrived for its shift. The afterlight wall waited. On the bench was an envelope with no return address. Inside, a money order for $300, a note in careful block letters. For brushes, from someone who knows about broken and learning to hold. Aria propped the note on a clip and set the money order aside to be recorded. Ellen would insist. She brewed coffee strong enough to rebuild a person and sat with her back to the warm light, just for a minute, to inventory gratitude. Cassandra for the armor, Ethan for the ledger song, Sloane for the laughter that loosens bolts, Ellen for the line called reality, Miguel for shut-off valves and children, Jasmine for the tilt that told the truth, and herself for the year of being small on purpose so she could fit through the door and the work of enlarging once inside. At 9, the first knock, a woman in a thrifted blazer, nerves bright as a wire. I saw the video, she said. I run a shelter. We need a room that holds. Come in, Arya said. We'll measure twice. They walked the space, talked the budget, sketched a bed in the corner that made a person feel unobserved by sadness. Arya handed her a bolt of tape in a simple drawing she could take to a board meeting and use like a flashlight. When the woman left, shoulders straighter, Arya turned back to the wall and pressed the first small brass nail into the letter A. It rang, clear, delicate, something like a bell. By noon, the atelier was noisy again, the way good rooms are. Hammers and murmurs and a kid explaining to a grown-up why crooked can be honest. Arya stood in the middle of it all, sleeves pushed, pencil behind her ear, line of paint on her wrist like a promise. Last year in a ballroom, she had watched the moment a marriage ended and vowed to become the woman who would not fall apart in public, but would build in plain sight. Tonight, in the same ballroom, she had kept that vow, not with spectacle, but with an invitation, not with fury, but with a list. She had not won. She had chosen. She picked up her tape measure, flicked it open, and watched the bright steel find its length. Then she bent to the work of rooms, of lives, of making light behave.